David never suspected a thing. Life with Maria had always been a whirlwind of impromptu dinners, lazy Sunday mornings, and vacations planned on whims. Their love was the kind people wrote novels about, or so he thought. It was a chilly October evening when Maria sat down across from him, her eyes not meeting his, a tremble in her voice. "David, I need to talk to you about something serious," she started, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. David set down his cup, alarm bells ringing in his head at her tone. "What's wrong, love?" Maria took a deep breath, her voice a whisper. "I've been diagnosed with cancer." The word hung heavy between them, a sinister fog that filled the room. "It's advanced. I need treatment, expensive treatment abroad." David felt his world spin. "Cancer? Maria? It couldn't be." But the earnest look in her eyes, the way she had started losing weight, the sudden bouts of sickness, it all made a tragic sense. "How much do you need?" he asked, already mentally calculating their savings, the equity on the house, his retirement funds. Maria bit her lip, avoiding his gaze. "It's a lot. The treatment, the travel. I need $100,000. Without a second thought, David nodded. "You'll have it. Whatever it takes, Maria." The next few weeks were a blur. Maria shaved her head, her beautiful curls falling to the floor, a stark symbol of her fight. David spent his days working extra hours, and his nights researching the best treatments, clinging to hope. "I can't believe how much you're doing for me," Maria whispered one night as they lay in bed, her head smooth and pale in the moonlight. "I love you so much." "I love you too." "We'll get through this together," David replied, holding her close, fighting off the creeping dread that it might not be enough. But then, the truth came crashing down. A mutual friend, confused by Maria's supposed need to stay in a foreign country for treatment, mentioned seeing her active on social media, looking healthy, laughing on the beaches of Spain, with another man. David's heart stopped. It was a chilly October evening, but the evidence was there when he logged into her Facebook account, a slew of messages, plans, a betrayal so deep it cut through his heart like ice. Maria and her lover, planning their new life with his money. The rage that followed was cold and sharp. David packed her belongings, changed the locks, and sat alone in the empty house, plotting. She thought she had fooled him, but this was far from over. Maria had taken his heart and his money, but she wouldn't get away with it. "I will find you," he whispered into the darkness. "And you'll wish you never betrayed me." The game had just begun. David's fingers danced over his keyboard as he booked the next flight to Spain. His heart was a drum of war, each beat a reminder of Maria's betrayal. As he packed, his mind raced with plans and possibilities. In the taxi to the airport, David's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, his sister, Laura. With a deep breath, he answered. "David, I just heard about Maria. I'm so sorry. How are you holding up?" Laura's voice was a mix of concern and disbelief. "It's complicated. I'm actually on my way to Spain," David confessed, his voice steady, belying the storm inside. "To Spain? David, what are you planning to do?" Laura's worry deepened. "I just need to see things for myself. Find out the whole truth." He couldn't tell her everything, not yet. "If you need anything at all, just let me know, okay? Be careful." "I will." "Thanks, Laura." David hung up, his resolve hardening. He wouldn't return without justice. Landing in Spain, the sun mocked him with its bright cheer. David hired a private investigator, Carlos, a grizzled ex-police officer with deep connections and a no-nonsense attitude. "So, you want to find this woman and her lover, and then what?" Carlos asked as they sat in a dimly lit cafe near the beach where Maria had last been spotted. "I just want to confront her, for starters. After that, who knows?" David kept his cards close to his chest. Carlos eyed him skeptically but nodded, pulling out his phone. "I'll start with the local hangouts and check the recent rentals. People like her leave traces." As they parted ways, David wandered down the beach, each step stirring memories of their past, of lies painted as love. He paused, watching a couple laugh nearby, their joy a stark contrast to his grim purpose. That evening, Carlos called him with a lead. "I found them. They are staying at a villa just outside Marbella. Looks like they're living it up with your money. Can you take me there?" David's voice was a blade, sharp and ready. "Meet me at dawn. We'll go together." Under the cover of early morning, David and Carlos approached the villa. The building was a whitewashed fortress under the rosy hue of dawn, deceptive in its tranquility. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Carlos's question was a lifeline thrown in a stormy sea. "Yes," David replied, his every nerve alight with the anticipation of confrontation. They found Maria and her lover, Jorge, enjoying breakfast on the terrace, the ocean a perfect backdrop. David felt a sick twist in his gut at the sight of them. "Maria!" His shout turned heads, his presence a grenade in the serene morning. Maria froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Jorge stood, his posture defensive. "Who is this?" David stepped forward, the truth afire behind his eyes. "I'm her husband. Or at least, I was until she decided to fake a deadly illness and run away with my life savings." Maria's face paled, guilt and fear mixing in her eyes. Jorge looked between them, the situation dawning on him. "What do you want, David?" Maria's voice was a whisper, her facade crumbling. "I want the truth. And then, I want everyone to know exactly who you are," David declared, his words ringing like a verdict. The scene set, a storm of revelations and confrontations awaited. Maria stood trembling, the morning breeze tugging at her light dress, her eyes wide with shock. Jorge stepped back, his gaze flitting between David and Maria, confusion etched across his face. "What are you talking about, Maria? You told me your husband was dead?" David's voice was laced with venom as he cut Jorge off. "Seems she's been telling tales on both sides of the Atlantic." Maria's shoulders slumped as she stared at the tiled floor of the terrace. "David, No," David snapped, stepping closer. "You don't get to talk yet. I spent months believing you were fighting for your life. I drained our accounts, borrowed money, all for a lie. For what? So, you could gallivant around Spain with him?" Jorge looked between them, his initial shock turning to anger. "You lied to me too, Maria? You told me you were escaping an abusive ex, not running away with his money. I was going to tell you, I swear, things got complicated," Maria pleaded, her voice shaky. David scoffed, shaking his head. "Complicated? You call deceiving us both, stealing my life savings, and faking a terminal illness complicated?" Carlos, who had been watching silently from the sidelines, now stepped forward. "I suggest we calm down and sort this out legally. David, you have enough evidence to press charges, both here and back home." Maria's eyes widened in terror. "Please, David, I'm sorry. I made a mistake, a big one. I never meant for things to go this far." David felt a pang of old affection, quickly suppressed by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. "A mistake? You meticulously planned this. You played the victim so well, Maria." Turning to Jorge, David's gaze hardened. "And you? Were you just an innocent bystander? Or did you know about her plan?" Jorge raised his hands, a gesture of innocence. "I knew nothing of this, I promise you. I thought we were starting fresh, that she was in danger and needed help." The air was thick with tension, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the shore. David took a deep breath, trying to quell the anger bubbling inside him. "Here's what's going to happen," David began, his voice firm, controlled. "Maria, you're going to transfer every penny back to my account. Then, I'm pressing charges for fraud and deception." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course. I'll do it right now. And Jorge, if I find out you had any part in this, you'll be hearing from my lawyer too." David's warning was clear, his eyes steely. Jorge nodded, his face pale. Understood. As Maria fumbled with her phone, transferring the stolen funds, Carlos spoke quietly to David. You did well handling this. It's a tough situation, but you're getting justice. David watched as the confirmation of the transfer appeared on his phone. The money was back, but the hollow feeling in his chest remained. He had come for revenge, but found only the sad remnants of what used to be his happiness. Let's go, Carlos, David said, turning away from the shattered remains of his past life on the sunlit terrace. There's nothing left for me here. As they walked away, David knew this was just the beginning of rebuilding his life, but at least now, he could start with the truth unveiled and his conscience clear. The Spanish sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets of Marbella as David and Carlos walked in silence. David's mind was a tumult of emotions, the sting of betrayal lingering like a bitter aftertaste. As they reached Carlos's office, a sleek, modern building tucked away from the bustling tourist spots, Carlos turned to David with a solemn look. I think there's something else you should know. During my investigation, I uncovered more about Maria's background. It's troubling. David paused, the weight of the past days settling heavily on his shoulders. What is it? Carlos ushered him inside and pulled up a file on his computer. Maria wasn't just living a double life. She has a history of fraud, spanning several countries. Each time, the same pattern: romance, deceit, and theft. David's heart sank further. The realization that the woman he had loved was a habitual criminal twisted the knife already lodged in his heart. How many others? At least 4 documented cases before you, Carlos revealed, clicking through the profiles of other men who had fallen victim to her schemes. A cold fury settled over David. And Jorge? Was he an accomplice? Carlos shook his head. No, seems like he was a pawn, just like you. But there's something off about his story too. Let's just say he's no stranger to the law either. Before David could process this new information, his phone buzzed. It was Laura. David, you need to come home. There's been a development. Worry knotted in his stomach as he booked his return flight, leaving Spain with far more questions than answers. Back home, Laura met him at the airport, her expression grave. David, while you were gone, someone broke into your house. The police think it might have been Maria trying to retrieve something she left behind. Or more likely, something to implicate her further, David muttered, frustration coursing through him. They drove to his house, where the police were still on the scene. Inside, his home was a mess, drawers pulled out and contents strewn about. A detective approached, a frown creasing her brow. Mr. Reynolds, do you know about a safe Maria might have wanted to access? David froze. Yes, it's in my office. But why? The detective cut him off. We found it open and empty. Do you know what was inside? Panic rose in David's throat. Documents, some jewelry, and old letters. As they walked to his office, David's mind raced. The letters, they were from his late grandfather, sentimental but of no real value to anyone else. Why would Maria want them? When they entered the office, David immediately saw the safe, its door ajar. He knelt, searching through the scattered papers, until his hand brushed against an envelope tucked beneath a loose floorboard, an envelope he had never seen before. Inside were photographs and letters, not from his grandfather, but evidence of a deeper deception. They detailed a plot, not just by Maria but involving his own lawyer, someone he had trusted implicitly. The plan was to siphon off his wealth slowly, using the cancer story as a cover. David's vision blurred with rage and betrayal. She wasn't working alone. Laura placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but steady. We'll get to the bottom of this, David. Everyone involved will pay. In the weeks that followed, David worked with the police and a new, trustworthy lawyer. Charges were pressed, not just against Maria but also against his former lawyer and several others in the conspiracy. Maria was eventually arrested in Italy, still with Jorge, who was cleared of involvement in her schemes against David. They parted ways, Jorge disillusioned and broke, Maria facing a long sentence. David stood outside the courtroom, the final hearing over, the gavels echo a sweet sound of closure. Laura joined him, offering a smile. It's finally over. David nodded, looking up at the clear blue sky. It is. But I'm ready to move on, learn from this, and perhaps, learn to trust again. He turned away from the courthouse, the chapter of Maria closed forever, his heart lighter, ready for a new beginning, with the scars of the past etched as lessons learned.